Hey there, guys. Okay, so this video is going to be more or less me working out my own thought process on this topic and excising some conflicting thoughts and feelings that have been wandering around. Title of this video is that we can't control when anybody else wakes up. And for people who are, I guess, attracted to this channel that um, think and pay attention to what's going on in our country and geopolitically and socially and everything. Um, I just don't know how much of this might have crossed your mind, but it tends to cross my mind a lot, and it causes a lot of conflicts and thinking and feeling. Um, that I don't really have the answers to. So I guess what I'm doing here is just kind of starting a discussion. And so here is the premise of where I'm going with all of this. And that is that unfortunately, we live in a society. And because we live in a society, we are inherently subject to the consequences of other people's shitty decisions. And that includes having to suffer the consequences of a mainstream majority that is pretty politically illiterate, emotionally driven, easily manipulated, and oftentimes not even interested in being better informed when they have the opportunity to be better informed. And no matter how much people who are more switched on try to tell them, they have continued to uphold a completely fucked up system that is taking us all down with it. And I, for one, have often felt a lot of resentment about that. So, for example, in the recent weeks with the Holocaust going on in Palestine, I've been encouraged and inspired and hopeful to see this kind of global mass awakening. I talked about it in the video that I just did. Let's Talk About Palestine was the video. And so I don't want to take away from that. The fact that there is so much solidarity and such an outpouring of love on behalf of Palestine from so many disparate groups of people, including many people who were just kind of conventional liberals, kind of finally found some issue that was their deal breaker issue, and now they're saying, well, we're not going to vote for Biden unless he calls for a ceasefire in Palestine. My first thought when I've been hearing that is, well, you shouldn't have fucking voted for him the first time. And if you hadn't voted for him the first time, we wouldn't be here right now. Um, and that's still how I feel. So that's frustrating because, along with a lot of the Bernie contingent, most of us who were very ardent Bernie Sanders supporters at the time were very vocal. We worked very hard to try to inform other people and present them with facts and rationale and good, solid information and support why we felt like Bernie Sanders' policies were the best for all of us with all kinds of reasoning and data. And um, we tried very hard in both 2016 and 2020 to tell people who Hillary Clinton is and who Joe Biden is. And with those two particular candidates, there were decades of actions in their political careers that anybody could learn about. Anybody, anywhere, anytime. It was all out there. It was perfectly available. And in my view, there's no excuse. There's no excuse for not bothering to find out who you were voting for. And I mean that both times. So, for whatever we could all say about Bernie Sanders, and I've said plenty, if you are feeling a moment of needing to commiserate with other Bernie Sanders supporters about that entire heartbreak of our lives, I wrote an open letter to Bernie Sanders on my Medium page under Adventures in the Free World. It's called Dear Bernie Sanders on the Day You Quit the Revolution. Welcome to read that for sure. So there's a lot of things to be said there about Bernie having betrayed us all and not being the guy we thought he was and everything. But regardless, because of the size of the movement that he built and the amount of momentum at the grassroots and the number of conversations that he started and the fact that he, I believe, was genuinely convinced of these policy positions, had he gotten elected in 2016, which he very much would have if the Democratic Party had permitted him to get the nomination, or even 2020, we would be living in a different world right now. We would most likely all have health care. Between 2016 and 2020, everybody would have had Medicare for all. By the time that pandemic came around, everybody would have had health care. We wouldn't have policies that ran people off the cliff into total economic ruin, I don't think. We wouldn't have started a war with Russia. Think of the hundreds of thousands of people in Ukraine that died because people voted for Joe Biden. Because whatever you want to say about Trump, he didn't start any new wars. He did some shitty things, you know, murdering the Iranian general and allowing the American journalist Jamal Khashoggi to get dismembered by Mohammed bin Salman in Saudi Arabia. Trump did a lot of really shitty things. I'm not saying his foreign policy was good, but he didn't start any new wars. Hundreds of thousands of people have died in Ukraine. The United States is now doing military actions in Haiti. Not to mention all the operations around the world that we're not being told about. We've had troops in Ethiopia in the past 3 years. And now here's Israel committing an actual Holocaust. And I warned people that the Democratic Party would be worse for all of these things than the Republicans. I tried really hard to get that across, and I presented all kinds of facts about Joe Biden's political record, which again was 40 years long before 2020, and it was widely available to anybody that wanted to read it. And so is Trump's extremely short 4-year political record. So that's another source of frustration, because the people that hate Trump don't hate him for anything that has to do with his actual policy positions or actions in office, like political actions. This complete mass formation psychosis around Trump is based on like his tweets and the liberal class's just general moral panic and dislike of his personality, because he doesn't sound like he's part of their class. Like, somebody who's a billionaire should be more educated and more technocratic than Donald Trump. He doesn't talk pretty. He doesn't tweet pretty. He says rude things. He says the quiet parts out loud. But which one of Donald Trump's actual policies as president while in office is meaningfully different in any way from all of the presidents that came before him and from Joe Biden that came after him. And see, that was like obvious. It was obvious in 2020. So I feel a tremendous sense of frustration at my fellow Americans, uh, especially the progressives in the Bernie Sanders contingent that went ahead and voted for Biden because Bernie told them to, and actually fell for this utter horseshit. Like, Bernie comes out and says he's going to be the most progressive president we've ever had. And Joe Biden's like, well, I might forgive $10,000 worth of student debt and do a $15 minimum wage. And people were dumb enough to fall for that shit and then vote for it. And then in the subsequent years, like these expressions of disappointment and disillusionment. Oh my God, Biden lied to us. He's not going to do student debt cancellation. He lied to us about $15 minimum wage. Well, no shit. Did you think he suddenly became a different guy? I mean, who is dumb enough, first of all, to listen to what politicians say when they're campaigning for office and take any of that as face value? And then, second of all, it's like the old Maya Angelou thing, right? When people show you who they are, believe them. Well, Joe Biden showed the United States who he was every day in the Senate and wherever else he was politically before that for decades. And people were naive enough and uh, irrationally, emotionally driven enough to convince themselves that Joe Biden was going to be a better option than Trump. So let me tell you, under the 4 years that Trump was president, at least there was an energized left. At least there were people that were paying attention. We didn't have a liberal class that was 100% out to brunch. We had people that actually wanted to do something. There was some momentum on the grassroots, you know? And the 360-degree mass surveillance and censorship dragnet that is rapidly descending on all of us was not as advanced, although that's obviously been getting progressively worse since the Bush did the Patriot Act back in 2001 or whenever that was. Um, of the presidential administration since then, the presidents that have been the absolute worst for censorship, for the torture and prosecution of whistleblowers, and for increasing mass domestic surveillance to shut down dissent on the left, have been the Democrat presidents. Obama and Biden have been the worst on those. And I warn people that if Biden got in office, the first thing he would do would be to clamp down on dissent from the left and implement as many policies as possible in his administration to make sure that we can never organize a revolt against the government again. And what happened? But the FBI engineered this whole thing on January 6th that people are still dumb enough to call an insurrection as if anybody even died. Like, I mean, there are so many bigger problems and so many worse things happening in the United States and caused by the United States abroad than that debacle at the Capitol building. That when I see people pearl clutching about that, I just have this sense of disdain. But, like, that was completely engineered. And the information about the fact that that was engineered and fomented by confidential informants and the FBI was like available from the beginning. Like, independent media was onto that shit right away. And not 5 minutes later, all of a sudden, the Domestic Terrorism Act was just already printed up and ready to sign. Imagine that. So, like, it's just frustrating. I said this in the video on Let's Talk About Palestine, that we can't control when other people wake up. And people wake up on their own timelines, whether we like it or not. And unfortunately, for whatever reason, the people that are finally waking up right now, I mean, it's better late to the party than never, I guess. It's so conflicting, right? Because, like, movement politics 101 says that solidarity is required across a broad base. Like, we are not going to succeed in implementing anything that would be considered an anti capitalist or anti imperialist policy priority, or even anything that is incrementally along those lines that involves the redistribution of wealth or power, or reducing or putting an end to the Pentagon's endless warfare, without a broad coalition of people united in solidarity around the issues where we can make common cause. And that means people that we don't like, people that have done shitty things in the past, um, you know, people we just fundamentally disagree with. We might disagree with somebody on a dozen issues, but have common cause with them on one issue, and have to figure out a way to unite around that if we want to get momentum on that one issue, like for healthcare, for example. And this is something that's been pointed out. I know Jimmy Dore has pointed it out because he's interviewed people from movement politics in the 60s and 70s, especially I think it was like labor unions in Nevada, where black workers in the service industry were demonstrating with people that were even in the KKK, because they were all in these unions together. And that's kind of like an extreme example, but Chris Hedges points this out a lot too. It's like we can't build coalitions by holding resentments against people for what they did in the past and canceling everybody that doesn't agree with us. And so it's like I kind of constantly reminding myself of that, because I mean, I don't think any of us that cares about um the atrocities happening in Palestine right now would want all the people that voted for Biden in 2020 to fuck off and not be demonstrating on behalf of Palestine, and not be saying, well, we're not going to vote for Joe Biden this time. I mean, like, honestly, we were definitely glad you're all here. If we were going to try and build a movement for Palestinian liberation, based on only people that had our specific set of leftist credentials for some particular length of time, like only people who didn't vote for Joe Biden in 2020, or only people who didn't vote for Hillary Clinton, or only, I mean, we'd be fucked. There'd be nobody. Like, these protests would be, like the one in Washington D.C. that had like 300,000 people. I mean, we probably would have had 30,000 people there. So I'm constantly having to remind myself of that, but that doesn't alleviate the general sense of aggravation. I mean, one of this data points about the way that the United States' insistence on supporting Israel is probably affecting the 2024 election is that the Muslim vote now is like reduced from, like, I think it was like 89% of the Muslims voted for Joe Biden. It's reduced down to 17%. And my thinking process is automatically like, first of all, who are those fucking 17%, and why isn't it 0%? And second of all, why did that 89% of fucking dumbasses vote for Joe Biden in 2020 to begin with? Nobody should have voted for Biden at all, in my opinion. And Palestine shouldn't be the only reason not to vote for him. So, like, when I'm hearing these chants of no ceasefire, no vote, I'm like, really? That's it? That's your only issue? Like, that's the only thing that you have a problem with him about? Like, it doesn't bother you that he's been engaged in nuclear brinksmanship with Russia for 3 years and that people have been getting kidnapped off the streets in Ukraine for years and forcibly conscripted into service and shoved up in the front lines as cannon fodder against Russia in an unwinnable war. Like that doesn't bother you at all. It doesn't bother you that we just went through years of draconian dystopian pandemic policy that was based on zero science, with people losing their jobs and being forced out of school, um, and forced out of business and having to take drugs in their body that have caused catastrophic um, injuries and side effects for hundreds of thousands of people. Like, why does nobody have a problem with those things? Why did it finally take Palestine to wake your asses up? So, I don't know. I mean, I know that there is a more elevated way to look at all of this. And I know that practically speaking, in terms of building coalitions, there is a level of suck it up that all leftists have to just embrace if we want a hope of getting anybody else mobilized along with us. Um, it doesn't make me feel any better or less frustrated about it. And I don't know if there is any way for other people to break through to someone and be a catalyst in their political awakening, or if it is something that has to come entirely from within. I really don't know. Like, I don't know if it does any good at all. Like, all of the effort that myself and many people put into writing and sharing information and trying to inform people, I don't know whether it does anything or not. For myself, my awakening came from the inside. In 2004, I was part of a PAC that I was working for that was campaigning for John Kerry, for fuck's sake. I mean, I absolutely hated George Bush, still do. Anybody that knows, like, that has a clue about our political system in the past few decades knows that Bush was infinitely worse than Trump could have been in his wettest wet dream. Um, and I was still indoctrinated into this, like, the Democrats are the good guys thing. And so, like, John Kerry didn't give anybody a reason to vote for him. He ran the most limp dick neoliberal campaign imaginable. But I was working for this PAC and we were signing up voters and trying to get people to vote for John Kerry. And I remember talking to so many third party voters that year and shaming all of them, like, you guys are the reason that we're going to get stuck with Bush again. And then Obama came along, and I was utterly convinced Obama was going to be like our savior. I thought that he sounded like Martin Luther King Jr. when he spoke. I thought he was going to save us from all the, nightmare of the Bush years. I thought he was going to end the wars. I mean, I thought it was going to be this magical new day. And like, I cried on the night of the inauguration. And I ignored my boyfriend at the time. I don't know why he was like Team McCain that year for some reason, but he was saying a lot of true things about Obama. Like, he'd come home and tell me how much money Obama was taking from Goldman Sachs. And I would just cover my ears and be like, yes, we can. Because that was his slogan in his first campaign was, yes, we can. And then another day, I remember he came home and talked about how the Bush administration gave Obama his whole entire cabinet. Like they basically assigned to him, like, this is who your cabinet's going to be. And it was all like Wall Street ghouls. And Obama hadn't even won the primary yet. And I just wasn't listening to any of that at all. Like I was sure that Obama was the guy. I didn't want to hear anything else about it. And then in that first administration, when he bailed out Wall Street, I went, something's wrong and somebody's been lying to us. And then the situation in Libya, right? But there wasn't anybody in my world or on my social media that was like curating content for me and handing it to me. Like nobody was sending me links to articles or podcasts or independent media or shows and saying, watch this, read this, or like explaining to me how anything worked. I just woke up from the inside because I was fed up with the cognitive dissonance of knowing that there was something wrong and knowing that we were being lied to and not being able to put a finger on what it was. So I started watching all these documentaries and reading all these books, but all of this was motivated from the inside. Um, I discovered a film company called Metanoia. I'm over enunciating just to make sure that it's clear. Metanoia Films, I'll put that in the video description. They have amazing work. The documentary of theirs that I discovered that really rocked my world is called Human Resources Social Engineering in the 20th Century. And it was on YouTube, and I think it is again, but YouTube has taken it down repeatedly. But you can watch all of Metanoia's films on their website. Just stream it directly off their website for donation, like they don't charge a fee. I watched that. I watched another one called Plutocracy, which is now a 4 or 5 part film series on their website. But at the time, I think there were 2 parts. And Plutocracy is about the history of the labor wars in the United States. And that was a huge eye opener about a lot of things. They don't teach us about the labor wars in this country at all. And during this time period, I had a lot of time on my hands, and I cross referenced everything that these documentaries quoted. So, like, if there was a quote by a person, I went and I tracked down that person and I found out who they are, and I started reading their works. Um, if they cited some sort of a military operation or a CIA project, I tracked that down and found it in the law to verify that it really existed. Because I was like, I'm not trying to go down any just conspiracy rabbit holes. Like, if I can't find it in the law, then I'm going to assume it's not real. So I spent a couple years doing that. And the advantage of taking the long lens and understanding the American political system thoroughly, and also our monetary system, how our monetary policy works, how the money is created, um, is that it gives you the ability to recognize patterns very quickly and easily without necessarily having to have the play by play of singular events. And it also makes you immune to a lot of disinformation because you don't have to evaluate each event on a standalone basis and say, well, is this information about this event true or not true? You just know whether or not it fits the pattern. If it fits the pattern of how the American empire does imperialism, then you're probably right about what you think is going on. If it doesn't fit the pattern about American imperialism, then maybe there's some things to unpack and reassess or evaluate. I know that, most Americans are super busy. People are just trying to survive, which is all by design. Like intentionally put in the position where we have little to no time on our hands. Um, and we're just taking care of our own responsibilities within our very narrow field of view to keep our own lives together takes up all of our time and energy, and then we got to get up the next day and do all that shit all over again. That's totally by design, and that's something that they expound upon a lot in human resources social engineering in the 20th century. I can't recommend that film enough. I mean, that one is a mind blower. Like, you know that we're manipulated and propagandized, but the depths to which that has happened and the specificity and level of detail to which that's been engineered, how that was all researched and figured out going back like over a century now is really, that's really something, is what it is. It's really something. So, it's easy to get frustrated with the ignorance of the mainstream, in particular for myself, because I feel like there wasn't anything extraordinary about me. I don't think you have to be a genius to just bother to go and learn how shit works. You just have to have a willingness to let go of all your sacred cows, right? You have to have a willingness to prioritize truth over your personal sense of comfort or your personal sense of certainty. And psychologically, human beings have a very deep need to maintain a sense of certainty. And so people will protect a feeling of being right even when they know they're wrong, because the way that the human brain evolved is really just a giant threat detection machine. Like the human brain didn't evolve for higher, more elevated thought. It didn't evolve to make us creative or, spiritually switched on, or to create elevated, healthy societies. The human brain evolved with really one purpose, which is to detect threats and protect us from threats. And so anything that feels uncertain feels like a threat to the brain. And so, for a lot of really deep psychological reasons, people are often fundamentally much more invested in protecting their existing worldview, which is why things like confirmation bias exist. And then there's this other phenomenon called cognitive ease, and they kind of go hand in hand. So, cognitive ease and confirmation bias really work together. Um, and so, cognitive ease is basically that the brain automatically selects for the most straightforward, easiest interpretation of anything. And then we'll often just kind of stop there. And so if a person feels like, oh, well, that's because this, and they have this easy interpretation, they're not really inclined to look any further than that. And then cognitive bias, there's that, or confirmation bias. There's two forms of confirmation bias, and I don't know which one is which. There's confirmation A bias and confirmation B bias, and the gist of it is basically if you are already given towards thinking everything is some sort of a conspiracy, then you're going to automatically be biased to find conspiracies everywhere. And if you tend to be biased towards thinking Occam's razor is the most rational explanation for everything, and people who get into conspiracies are just making shit up, then your bias is going to always be in the direction that there's no conspiracy and everything is going to be pretty much at face value. So I keep waiting and hoping for a mass awakening on this planet. And, a lot of people in kind of like new age and spiritual spaces are constantly talking about this mass awakening that they say is going on right now. And, talking about fifth dimensional consciousness and saying that because there is a mass awakening, there's also a lot more chaos because one thing is a catalyst for the other thing. Um, I want them to be right. I tend to feel a whole lot more cynical than that. In Vedic scripture, the Vedas being the basis for Hinduism, but a lot of people in the Hindu religion don't know anything about the Vedas. So there's this whole separate thing called Vedanta, which is the study of the Vedic philosophy. The Vedic scriptures have a way of categorizing human societies on Earth in these cycles that are multiple thousands of years. The Mayans did this too, and they have these ages or these yugas that they talk about. Um, and they say that these four yugas or these four ages that exist have cycled around multiple times, which is why there have been much, much, much higher evolved human societies thousands and tens of thousands of years ago than what we have right now. And there is a progressive descent from Sattva Yuga, which is kind of like a long age of enlightenment that lasts, I think, like 3 or 4 thousand years. Because the total cycle with the four yugas is a cycle of 12,000 years, but it's not like evenly split. Like it's not like every one of them is 3,000 years. So the Sattva Yuga is like this age of enlightenment. And then things start to degrade for a while, and then human society ends up being in Dvapar Yuga, Dvapar Yuga, um, which is the age of duality. So Dvapa, or the root word of that in Sanskrit is two. So in Sattva Yuga, people are consciously aware of the oneness of all things, and they're fully integrated and embodied in that. And so because they're aware that there is only this one united consciousness, the way that human beings interact with each other and other living beings tends to reflect that level of spiritual elevation where things kind of exist in perfect harmony, and truth. And over a period of time, there's like a degradation of society that introduces this idea of duality, like good and evil, dark and light, us and them, in here, out there. Basically the illusion of separation. And so that goes on for a few thousand years, and then things degrade even more to Treta Yuga, Treta meaning three, and I don't remember. Like I've studied a lot of Vedanta philosophy, so I've had it explained to me, like the very specific progression and what happens in each one of these descents. But I don't remember all that off the top of my head right now. But Treta Yuga is the third one where things are kind of starting to get worse and more degraded and less cohesive societally. You start to see more darkness emerging into the world, and then you finally get down to Kali Yuga, which is like the dark age. And all of these enlightened masters of various Eastern traditions, particularly people who are grounded in the Vedic philosophy, have said for a long time that humanity has been in Kali Yuga, or like the Dark Age, already for multiple centuries. And I don't know exactly when it started. I think I heard that the Dark Age, the Kali Yuga, kind of started with the collapse of the Bronze Age. The Bronze Age human societies where there was a lot of advancement and stuff, and then it kind of threw like all of Europe into the Dark Ages. It was like around then. And, Kali Yuga just gets worse and worse with warfare and greed and just like the worst of humanity and death and destruction and all that. And until it gets bad enough that there start to become a series of catalyzing events where um, there is a progressive enlightenment on the planet again, and everything goes back to Sattva Yuga. So, whether or not this is something that you think sounds plausible or whatever is entirely subjective. But when I try to look at this through that lens, I'm a lot more cynical about this idea that there is this mass awakening on the planet right now, because according to the timeline that I've heard, we still have like 1,000 more years of dark age before anything gets better. But then again, look at the global outcry over the situation in Palestine and look how the winds are shifting there. So it's really hard to say. I mean, on my more charitable days and in my more charitable moments, I can put aside the sense of judgment and contempt and disdain for other people and just remember that people all wake up at different times. I mean, back when I was campaigning for John Kerry, people were trying to tell me about the two-party system, and I wasn't trying to hear it, you know? And then I fell for the Obama grift, just like a lot of people fell for the Obama grift, even though in retrospect, all the red flags were right there, I mean, And then I put all my hopes and dreams into Bernie Sanders twice, and um, totally bought into this idea that the Democratic Party can be changed from within and pulled to the left if we just elect of enough of these progressive, representatives. And so, like, every single day has radicalized me a little bit more than the day before over the last 10 years or so. And what seems painfully obvious to me and feels like it should be obvious to everybody else, and that everybody should just hurry up and snap the fuck out of it and listen to those of us on the left telling them how it is. And if we say, well, unfortunately, you are uninformed and you've been listening to the wrong sources, here, read this, watch this documentary, read this book, check out this author, go to this independent news channel, and people should just do the fuck what we say and vote for who we tell them to, and just trust that we know better than they do. um I really wish it worked that way, but it doesn't. And so then the other thing that, causes internal conflicts is, well, boy, I wish we could just like separate society off into, you know, here are the people that did not participate in these horrible decisions that led to all of these destructive things. So we're just going to go over here and rightfully live in a bubble where we are inherently protected from all the shitty consequences of those shitty voting decisions. And you people over there that voted for Joe Biden, you guys can deal with the consequences of your own voting decisions and, pay for them over there. But that shit shouldn't have to affect me because, like, I didn't do it, you did it, right? Like, I hate that I am stuck sharing the country and the world with other people where other people's ignorance gets to affect my life. I can't even think of a positive way to frame that. And I mean, I'm sure that a lot of this video is just going to sound like I'm venting, and I am. I mean, I'm sure many people that have had these thoughts themselves have needed to commiserate with somebody. So let's commiserate on this together. I hate that. I think it's fundamentally unfair, and that is the detriment of having to live in a society. And very honestly, if I could afford my own island and go live there alone, many times I feel like I would do that. But let's hope that there is some sort of redemptive quality to all of this. I mean, um, I spent some time in Trinidad at an ashram back around 2012 for a few months, and I was involved in a really intensive Vedanta study. And we were studying chapter 3 of the Bhagavad Gita. And not to go off on a long tangent about the Bhagavad Gita, but the 18 chapters of the Bhagavad Gita are organized by topic. And chapter 3 is the chapter that specifically deals with karma and the laws of karma and how they work and stuff. So, the way that the West interprets karma is pretty dismal and loses a lot. I mean, the way that, I mean, the West has just colonized everything Indian. Like, they've colonized yoga, they've colonized Ayurveda, they've colonized all these things, and a lot of Sanskrit words that have made it into the Western lexicon, like pundit, guru, karma, are based on interpretations of what they mean that are 30% accurate at best. But we were discussing karma, and I asked the Swami that was leading the class, like, then why are we affected by other people's actions? Like, if karma is, based on the long arc of all of our incarnations, um, since the beginning of time, and we're just constantly on this continuum of experiencing the results of something that we did at some point in the past, whether it be in this lifetime or another lifetime, but ultimately is the results of something that we did, then how do we explain why we get affected by stuff that other people do? And she said that there is also such a thing as collective karma. So she said that we are born into the countries and the generations and the time periods that we're born into, based on shared collective karma that we all have in common. And so she said that it is not an accident either. When I think of it through that framing, it does help to some degree. Um, and another thing that is helpful is, you know, I've heard this labeled spiritual bypassing before, and I don't agree with that. That the best thing that we can do for the planet is to wake up ourselves. And, for myself, like, there have been a lot of times that I have just wanted to get away from all of this and go pursue my own spiritual evolution and just kind of, sell my shit and move to India and go live in an ashram and just, if the world's going to go to hell, let it go to hell. But at least I will, um, get enlightened and get out of the cycle of birth and death. So at least I don't have to suffer from it or be affected by it. And that's been an ongoing temptation. But the stumbling block I always run into is the fact that I still care what happens to everybody else, you know, and um, and I care what happens to the animals and the other living beings on this planet, very much. And so I don't think I can ever not care or not pay attention. But I think that there is a lot of validity having had conversations with extremely elevated beings and enlightened masters who are fully embodied in the non dual consciousness and the full embodiment of the oneness of all things. Um, there is more ability to do good on the planet the more you evolve yourself, because it changes it changes your energy to such a degree that you are able to have a bigger impact. And the way it was explained to me is that on an energetic level, um, people who are anchoring light on this planet because they're highly spiritually evolved are influencing things. I know that sounds like really abstract and intangible, and I haven't fully worked it out myself. But there's a spiritual teacher named Muji who you can find all over the website, and I've done a bunch of online retreats with him and had several dialogues with him and stuff. And he said once that it's not irresponsible to prioritize our own spiritual awakening, because it's not like we're going to become inactive after that. Like, there's the old, I think it's an old Buddhist or Zen saying, like, what do you do before enlightenment? And the answer is chop wood, carry water. What do you do after enlightenment? Chop wood, carry water. Like, we're not going to stop living our lives and going to work and taking care of our families. But the depth of love and compassion and awareness that we're able to bring to everything, um, from a place of being fully embodied and having transcended the illusion of duality, um, increases the potency of the good we're able to do for the world. And so um, sometimes that's all we can do. I mean, I can't start a revolution. I don't have the resources. I don't have the social media following. I think I have like 20 subscribers on this channel and like 150 subscribers to my Medium blog. I don't have the notoriety. I don't have the money. I don't have the time or energy. I'm pursuing a profession that is entirely different from this. I have no desire to make a career out of politics or even being a political commentator, you know? And I think, I mean, we come into this world alone and we're going to go out of this alone. And we're not going to take any of this with us. The only thing we're going to take with us is how we have managed to evolve ourselves and how we have let the experiences of living in a society that we have to share with other people, and the ways that we have framed and interpreted those experiences, the beliefs that we've formed based on those things, and the way that we have let those inform our thoughts and actions toward others. Like, that's all we're going to take with us. And while we're here, we can do as much good as we can with the opportunities that present themselves right in front of us. But the nature of duality is such that, you know, if you remove one of a pair of opposites, something is always going to come in to take its place. Um, the law of physics, right? Or one of the laws of physics is that nature abhors a vacuum. If you've ever lived in a place where you had like an empty room that wasn't in use, like how long did you live there before that room was full of stuff, right? I mean, I had a perfect example. In 2005, my house burned down, and my ex and I lost all of our worldly possessions except for what was in our cars. And within 2 years, all of a sudden, we had all this shit again. Don't even know where it came from, right? So it was pointed out to me by this yogi one time because I, brought all of these heavy thoughts about, what about the world, and if everything is one and everything is God, and all of this is kind of an illusion, then what do we do about all the suffering that we see in front of us? And he said that, like, if you have these contrasts in this inherent dual nature, right? Such as, hunger and whatever its opposite is, satisfaction, or um, name an injustice and then name whatever you think the antithesis of that injustice would be. I can't think of specific examples right now. If you take away one of those pairs of opposites, something is always going to come in to fill the void in that pair of opposites, because the nature of the phenomenal world that can be perceived by the five senses is dual, right? Everything exists in these pairs of opposites. You can't remove one of a pair of opposites without something else taking its place. So he says, we're never going to put an end to wars. We're never going to put an end to hunger. We're never going to put an end to injustice, because the nature of human society is that that's what this is. Um, and everybody is on this individual soul journey to evolve out, use these events and use this world that we live in to evolve ourselves out of the recurring cycle of birth and death. But he also said, and the Bhagavad Gita says this as well, and so do all the Vedic scriptures, that doesn't mean that we don't do everything we can. And that doesn't mean that we don't try to do as much good as we can. It doesn't mean that we don't have compassion. I mean, for myself, like I can't look at um an animal being abused and be like, well, that must just be that animal's karma because of something they did at another birth. Or a child in Gaza clinging his cat and saying, I'm so scared, I'm so scared. I don't like that all the animals are so scared, into the camera. And think, well, that kid, well, he must have been an IDF soldier in his previous life, so he's just experiencing his karma. Like that wouldn't work. Like, we are supposed to grow in compassion and tolerance and love for others. And, as much as I have a lot of mental and emotional contradictions about this within my own self, many times, um, I do believe that love actually is the answer. And, kind of like Chris Hedges has said in multiple interviews when he talks about the far right and people who are like kind of really rabid Trump supporters with a lot of beliefs that, most of leftists would consider to be pretty odious and backwards. He said that the only way to cure the breakdowns of these social bonds and the breakdowns of social cohesion as the empire collapses is to actually find ways to reintegrate those people into the fabric of our society. Um, Canceling and marginalizing people just doesn't work. And that means that it's kind of on all of us, or for anybody who wants to play any kind of participatory role in doing what we can to make things better. Um, as people awaken, regardless of the fact that it's not on our timeline or according to our preference, and regardless of how asleep they were before and all the things that they might have done when they were asleep, we have to welcome them into the movement, and we have to continue moving forward from the present moment with the broadest coalition that we can build. So I say that for myself because I have to remind myself of that all the time. I don't know if any of you find this helpful, but comment below. And if you have found ways of working through this for yourself, um, where you have gotten to kind of a sense of acceptance and peace about the fact that, yeah, millions of people have made a lot of really shitty voting decisions and propped up and enabled the status quo, and that's why we're all stuck here experiencing all the shit that we are. Please do share with all the rest of us what you have realized for yourself or what has helped you. And if you just need to vent your frustrations, then do that too. So, thanks for listening to these musings, and hug and love on your animals and the people around you. Remember to pause and appreciate the things that you have to be grateful for. And let's all try our best to keep things in perspective. Um, and remember that this tapestry of life, like nothing is ever done, right? So how this all plays out, we don't know, but I do have to choose to think that humanity may yet surprise us all. Let's hope. All right. So, love to you all. Talk soon. Bye.